This is a true story. Out of respect for the dead, the rest has been told exactly as it occurred. In detective work, there's nothing good about getting a call before dawn. It's an unwritten law. It doesn't just wake you up, it drags you into someone else's nightmare, which from that moment on becomes yours. Deputy Sheriff Simpson's call on August 2nd, 1990, was no exception. The voice on the phone was tense, the words clipped. Home invasion, Dick. 1 dead, 1 wounded. Military serviceman. Looks like a robbery gone wrong. As I sped through the empty morning streets, the sticky North Carolina humidity seeped into the car. Fayetteville was still asleep, but in one of its quiet model suburbs, home to military families, someone's world had just been shattered. I imagined a standard scene, a broken window, overturned furniture, panic, violence. But what I saw defied all standards. The sergeant's house looked sickeningly perfect from the outside. A manicured lawn, neatly trimmed shrubs, an American flag by the porch. The only thing that broke this pastoral was the flashing lights of the patrol cars, their blue and red lights cutting through the pre-dawn fog. Deputy Marshal, the first on the scene, met me at the cordon tape. His face was pale. "The wife, Sherri, is dead, in the bedroom. 2 shotgun blasts," he reported quietly. "The husband, Warren, was hit in the leg. He's in the ambulance repeating the same thing. A masked intruder broke into the house." I nodded, passing under the tape. The air was thick, smelling of wet grass and something else, something acrid. Gunpowder. I approached the ambulance. A burly man in a military t-shirt and shorts sat on the back bumper. A medic was finishing bandaging his leg. He looked up at me, blank, almost calm. Too calm for a man who had just lost his wife. "Sergeant, I'm Detective Wright," I introduced myself. "I'm sorry you had to go through this. Can you tell me what happened?" His story was clear, almost mechanical, as if he were reading a report. He was awakened by a noise. He saw a silhouette in the darkness. A struggle ensued. The stranger grabbed his pump-action shotgun, which he kept by the bed. He shot at Sherri, then at him. In the confusion, he managed to snatch the gun and return fire. The perpetrator, wounded or not, burst out the front door and disappeared into the night. Every word fell into place, creating a logical, heroic picture. A husband defending his home. But something was scratching at his ears. Too smooth, too perfect. I left him with the medics and entered the house. The first thing I noticed was how perfectly tidy it was. No signs of a struggle. Not an overturned chair, not a broken vase. The boxes against the wall, ready for moving, stood untouched. I walked into the bedroom, and an icy chill ran down my spine. The smell of blood and gunpowder was almost overpowering. Sherri Bronson lay in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin. She looked as if she were sleeping peacefully. If not for the 2 horrific chest wounds that had turned the snow-white sheets into a crimson mess. A shotgun lay on the floor nearby. Everything was just as my husband had described. I examined the front door. There were 2 pellet holes in it. The very same shots the sergeant had allegedly used to stop the fleeing robber. I crouched down, studying the angle at which the pellets had entered the wood. From the inside out, just as he had said. But the trajectory was downward, as if they had fired not at the fleeing man, but at the floor in front of the door. My brain worked feverishly, trying to piece together this puzzle with key pieces missing. I could smell the lie. It hung in the air as thick as the smell of death. I needed fresh air. I walked outside and walked around the house and stood in the backyard. The morning sun was just beginning to color the sky. I looked down at the ground. The lawn was like a silver sheet, covered in thick, untouched dew. It glistened in the first rays, every blade of grass adorned with a crystal drop. I walked the entire perimeter of the house, from the fence to the porch, from the porch to the trees. Not a single trace, not a single crushed blade of grass. No one had entered this house, and no one had left it that night. I stood and looked at this perfect, pristine grass, and a cold realization washed over me. The intruder the sergeant had spoken of must have been able to fly, or he had never been here. Tense yet strangely calm, like a man reciting lines from a bad play. Warren Bronson's voice. Military. People like that usually either scream in terror or remain icy calm. He was trying to do both at once, and the falseness of the voice was jarring even through the drowsiness. The drive to their house took 15 minutes, but to me it felt like an eternity. An August night in North Carolina is thick, humid air, smelling of pine needles and wet earth. The street where the Bronsons lived was quiet and respectable. Perfect lawns, neat mailboxes. And in the middle of this pastoral, our patrol car, its blue and red lights, silently cutting through the darkness, turning the neighboring houses into shuddering ghosts. Deputy Marshal, the first on the scene, met me at the door. His face was pale in the light of the flashlight. "Dick, this is bad," he said, nodding toward the house. "Really bad." Inside, it smelled of gunpowder and something else. A sweet metallic smell that was unmistakable. Warren Bronson sat on the living room couch. A clumsy bandage, soaked with blood, was wrapped around his leg. He was a large man with a military bearing, but now he seemed deflated, pathetic. He looked up at me, and I saw rehearsed grief in his eyes. "He burst in," Bronson began, his voice shaking like music. "I heard a noise. I grabbed the gun. He was already in the bedroom. He shot Sherri, then me." He spoke, and I looked around. The living room was perfect, a stack of magazines on the coffee table, a couple of empty glasses nearby. No signs of a struggle. Bronson claimed to have wrestled the gun from his attacker and fired after him as he fled out the back door. We went into the bedroom, and there the nightmare became reality. Sherri Bronson was lying on the bed. I won't describe what a shotgun does at close range. Suffice it to say that the room was bathed in red. A pump-action shotgun lay on the floor next to the bed. My partner, Agent Bruce Kennedy, silently examined the doorframe. 2 jagged pellet holes. Bronson said he shot at a fleeing enemy. I crouched down. The angle of the pellets was odd. They came down from above, as if the shooter were standing over a target on the floor. He wasn't firing after a fleeing man. Something didn't add up. Details, tiny as grains of sand, were clogging the mechanism of his story and preventing it from working. Lies have their own smell, and here it mingled with the smell of gunpowder. But the real blow to his story awaited us outside. The night was damp, and the grass was covered in thick, heavy dew. It covered the entire backyard like a silvery carpet, untouched and virginal. Not a single footprint, not a boot print, not a crushed blade of grass. It was as if the only thing flying through the yard that night was the angel of death. I returned to the house. Bronson was still sitting on the couch, rocking back and forth. "Mr. Bronson," I said, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible, "there is very thick dew on the grass in the backyard. Your patrolman didn't find a single trace. How did your attacker leave the house without leaving a trace? Did he fly away?" He froze. His eyes darted around. The game was over, and he knew it. The pause dragged on. "Okay," he finally managed to say. "There was no attacker." There it was, the first twist. The first crack in the wall of lies. Kennedy sat down across from him. "Then what happened, Warren?" he asked softly. And the second version poured out. This time it was a tragic argument. According to him, it was Sherri who grabbed the gun. They struggled, the gun went off, hitting him in the leg, and he, in a fit of passion, snatched the gun and shot her. Self-defense. A tragic accident. This was closer to something plausible, but still false. Too many buts. Why was she sleeping if they were struggling? Why 2 shots? We took him to the station. There, in the sterile silence of the interrogation room, under the relentless fluorescent light, his confidence began to evaporate. He repeated his self-defense story over and over, clinging to it like a drowning man to a straw. Kennedy listened to him for hours, nodding, asking clarifying questions, letting him get tangled in his own web. And then, when Bronson was exhausted, Bruce leaned forward and said in a quiet, almost friendly tone, "Warren, this is all easy to check. We'll send the experts now. They'll swab Sherri's hands for gunpowder particles. If she fired a gun, as you say, the test will show it. If not, the test will show that too." It was a bluff. After all this time, the test would likely be inconclusive. But Bronson didn't know that. I looked at him and saw his world crumble. For a second, his face lost all expression, turning into a mask. He realized he was cornered, that his next sentence would either bury him or give him a chance to relent. The silence in the room became thick, almost palpable. He slowly raised his head, looking not at Kennedy, but at me. There was no longer any grief or fear in his eyes, only emptiness. The killer sat right in front of us. He opened his mouth, licked his dry lips. She didn't shoot," he whispered. And then he broke. Completely. The drive to their neat little house on the outskirts took 15 minutes. 15 minutes, during which a dozen scenarios ran through my head. But none of them prepared me for the silent, unnatural scene that awaited us. No flashing lights, no bustle. Just a lone patrol car parked at the side of the road, and the damp, thick air of an August morning that felt like you could cut it with a knife. The first thing I noticed was the dew. Thick, silvery. It covered every inch of the lawn like an untouched blanket of snow. Not a single footprint. Not a single flattened blade of grass leading from the house to the forest or the road. Ghosts leave no trace, but real burglars do. Deputy Marshall, the first on the scene, met us on the porch. His face was pale. "Detective Wright," he nodded to me and to my partner, Agent Bruce Kennedy. "He's inside, in the living room, shot in the leg. And his wife, she's upstairs, in the bedroom." Warren Bronson was sitting on the couch, his leg being clumsily bandaged by a paramedic. He looked up at us, and there wasn't grief in his eyes, but effort. He was trying so hard to look like a victim. He told us his story, the first of many. "He came in the back door," Bronson said, his voice shaking in the right places. "I woke up to the noise. I grabbed the gun. We struggled in the hallway. He fired, hit me in the leg. Sherri. He ran upstairs. I heard the shot. Then he ran downstairs. I snatched the gun from him and shot after him as he ran out the door." I listened to him while I looked around the house. It was perfectly tidy. The boxes stacked against the wall were as neat as if they'd been measured with a ruler. No signs of a struggle. Nothing overturned. I went to the back door. The lock was intact. No signs of forced entry. I stepped out into the backyard. There it was again. Dew. Pristine. "Bruce," I said quietly to my partner as we stepped aside, "look at the grass. Our shooter must be able to fly." Kennedy nodded, his gaze hard as steel. "And also, Dick, look at the holes in the door. The angle is downward. Like they shot at the floor, not at a running man." Bronson's lie was as flimsy as a house of cards in the wind, and we were about to blow it on him. In the interrogation room, under the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights, his story began to crumble. We pressed him with the dew, the lack of forced entry, the ballistics. He was sweating, fidgeting in his chair, And then a second theory emerged. Okay, there was no burglar, he breathed out. It was Sherri. We had an argument. She grabbed the gun, threatened me. In the struggle, it went off, wounding me. I was in a frenzy. I snatched the gun and fired. He looked at us, expecting us to buy this tale of self-defense. But it couldn't have been further from the truth. His wife, a petite woman, against a trained military man? Unlikely. Then Bruce Kennedy made his move. He leaned back in his chair, his voice deceptively soft. He told everything. After the argument over money and her threats to leave with their son, he couldn't sleep. He wandered the house in the pre-dawn silence. Then his gaze fell on the pump-action shotgun standing in the corner. He picked it up, loaded it. He stood over his sleeping wife. He told her, "I love you," and pulled the trigger, twice. At the trial, he and his lawyer tried one last trick. The fifth version. They hired a psychologist who talked wisely about mental dissociation. He claimed Bronson wasn't aware of what he was doing. He was in some kind of trance. I sat in the courtroom and listened to this nonsense, looking at the jurors. I saw in their eyes what I felt myself. Disgust for a man who had killed his wife in her sleep, and then tried to hide behind made-up stories and scientific jargon. The jury didn't take long. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty. First-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to mandatory life imprisonment without parole. As he was led away, he didn't even look in my direction. To him, I was just a detail in the landscape. Another problem that a lie hadn't solved. I closed the Bronson case file late that evening in my office. Another story of human darkness brought to an end. Outside, rain fell, washing away the day's grime from the city. For a moment, it seemed I could breathe a sigh of relief. That justice, however belated, brings peace. But that was only one chapter. Many more such files awaited me. Many sleepless nights and phone calls that pierced the silence. Stories of greed, jealousy, and cruelty hidden behind the neat facades of suburban homes. The shadows of the Bronson case hadn't yet cleared, but a new report was already lying on my desk. A completely different case. A silent disappearance, leaving no evidence or witnesses. No gunshots, no dew on the grass. Only emptiness and a chilling question. Where can a person vanish without a trace from their own life? In our city, silence never lasts long, and the next file on my desk was already waiting for its time.